Video number 244, writing and solving proportions. A proportion is the comparison of two equivalent ratios. Let's go ahead and write a proportion for the following. When cooking rice, we can use 3 cups of water for 2 cups of rice. This means upon using 12 cups of water, we will use 8 cups of rice. Now, whether you want to admit it or not, if you were posed with this problem, you would have been solving and thinking of a proportion. A proportion is taking different sized portions and making equivalent changes, and making the appropriate changes by using the equivalent ratio. So basically, we're looking at a 3-to-2 ratio, 3 cups of water per every 2 cups of rice. Therefore, 12 cups of water is 8 cups of rice, because you're using basically what? 4 groups of the cups of water and 4 groups of the cups of rice. You're using fractions, ratios, and thus a proportion. Here's another example of proportions. You could do 3 to 4 would equal 15 out of 20. Maybe you're talking about free throws in basketball. You hit 3 out of 4 free throws. Well, that means that if you, at that pace, if you would have given the opportunity to hit to shoot 20 free throws, you would have hit 15 if this 3 out of 4 pace were to continue. Then we also have, if you could drive 1,000 miles on 35 gallons of gasoline, that means you could drive 200 miles on 7 gallons of gasoline. And in a previous video, we did a dozen eggs. Well, if you had 2 dozen eggs that cost $2.19, perhaps then we could definitely say that 6 dozen eggs would cost $6.57, because we're talking about buying 3 sets of those 2 dozen. So you just multiply both the top and bottom here by 3. So this is relatively obvious stuff here, but pointing it out in this mathematical sense allows us to really understand what a proportion really is. Now, what's the pattern? There is definitely a pattern here in each one of these. Notice here, not only can you multiply one fraction by the same multiple, in this case you multiply it by 5 to get across, well, multiply by 5 over 5, which is 1. But notice here also, what's 3 times 20? Well, that's 60. What's 15 times 4? That's also 60. Okay, then notice here, 1,000 times 7, that's 7,000. Then of course 200 times 35, that will also end up being 7,000. Okay, and you can do the same thing here. Take a look, 5 over 4 definitely equals 10 over 8. I think we all agree with that, because you're just basically taking 2 groups of the 5 over 4. Well, 10 times 4 is 40, and of course 5 times 8 is 40. So therefore, since just by paying attention to the pattern, those of us that aren't even familiar with these ratios and proportions, you can then easily see how to solve a proportion. So if you could see here that you're missing this 4th spot here, the denominator of the second fraction, we could easily say, well, since 10 times 6 is 60, we know that 5 times x has to be 60. So that's what we could do. So we could then say that 5x equals, well, that's supposed to be 60. Let's go ahead and make that change here. I'm just going to grab a marker here. So we have 5x equals 60, therefore we have x equals 12. So let's go on to the next one. Here we are. Let's solve 5 over 6 equals y over 12. Well, obviously, now in this one here is more of a mental math one. We probably wouldn't even bother doing the steps that we have shown below, but because you could just easily see that 6 times 2 is 12, so therefore 5 times 2 is 10. So we could just say that y is 10. But again, the pattern that we saw was that when you multiply diagonally, those products are equal. So we could say that 5 times 12 is 60, therefore 6 times y has to be 60, therefore y is 10. Next one. Now this one might be a little bit tougher to recognize. Now some people know their times tables really well, so they would just say, well, 12 times 5 is 60, so therefore 10 times 5 is 50. Now, But of course, you do not have to be able to see those. It's definitely nice to see that. But again, the pattern we saw was 10 times 60 is 600. So therefore, we can say that 12 times W is 600. So 12W equals 600. Divide by 12, W equals 50. Here's the next one. Here's one involving fractions. Well, we're going to do the same thing. Okay? We're going to go ahead and do 15 times W and 3/4 times 40. So 3/4 times 40 is 30. Because of course you could take 3/4 times 40 and you can reduce the 40 and 4 down to a 10. 10 times 3 is 30. Divide by 2, W is 2. Let's apply this idea of a proportion. Let's go ahead and take a look at what could potentially be a very real life problem. If we can get exactly 632 miles on 18 gallons of gas, let's just say you calculated this before. Maybe you know that you have a vehicle that does have an 18-gallon tank and you were able to go exactly 632 miles on that tank of gas. Well, for a road trip of 2,550 miles, how many gallons of gas will we use? Okay, and then of course afterwards you could always figure out how much the trip's going to cost you by multiplying by the price per gallon. You could turn this into a bunch of different things. We're going to round to the nearest tenth if necessary. So here we are. We're going to write a proportion. We can use 632 over 18 equals 2,550 over x. Now notice here I have another proportion underneath that because there is definitely more than one way to do this, just like there's more than one way to do lots of problems. So you could line up the 632 miles per 18 gallons equals this many miles over that many gallons. So you'll have the miles lined up, the gallons lined up. Okay, and now in this one we're comparing, well, 632 miles versus 2,550 miles gives us 18 gallons versus how many of those gallons? Okay, again, notice the specific road trips would be lined up with one another, right? We're trying to figure out how many gallons you'll use for 2,550. Here you have the miles, gallons. Longer road trip, shorter road trip, right? And then last, you could do this one. A lot of people like to start with the x here. So x over 18 equals 2550 over 32. Make sure you have everything lined up. It tells the story the right way. Okay. 630. Eventually, all three of these, if you multiply diagonally, it's 632 times x, and then you're multiplying 18 times 2550. See that? And you end up getting 45,900. You'll divide the 45,900 divided by 632, and you'll get 72.6 gallons of gas. And then of course if you want to find out the price, you'll just have to multiply the 72.6 times the price per gallon on your particular road trip. You can even look ahead at the road that you're driving if you're taking I-80 or I-75, wherever you are in the country, and you can figure that out to find out the price for the road trip. So all right, that is what we have here for proportions. We will see you in the next one.